The wheel cracked with a sound like a gunshot, and Victoria Morrow knew her luck had just run out on the most desolate stretch of the Oregon Trail she'd seen in 800 miles. Victoria yanked hard on the reins, bringing her 2 exhausted oxen to a lurching halt as the wagon tilted dangerously to the left. Dust billowed around her in the late afternoon heat of August 1867, coating her already grimy calico dress with another layer of prairie dirt. She'd been traveling alone since leaving Independence, Missouri 3 months prior, determined to reach her uncle's homestead in Oregon Territory before winter set in. Now, staring at the splintered wheel hub and the precarious angle of her wagon, that determination felt like foolish pride. She climbed down carefully, her boots sinking into the sandy soil. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, nothing but brown grass and scattered sagebrush under a merciless blue sky. No other wagons in sight, no trees for shade. Just her, 2 worn-out oxen, and a crippled wagon containing everything she owned in the world. Victoria knelt beside the broken wheel, examining the damage with a sinking heart. The hub had split clean through. Even if she had the tools and knowledge to fix it, which she didn't, she lacked a replacement piece. She'd have to unload the wagon, somehow prop it up, and hope another party came along before her water ran out. She was reaching for the water barrel strapped to the wagon's side when she smelled it. Smoke. Victoria's head snapped up, her pulse quickening. She turned slowly, searching for the source, and her blood went cold. Thin wisps of gray smoke were curling up from beneath the wagon bed, right where the broken wheel had caused the axle to grind against the wooden frame. For a heartbeat, she stood frozen. Then instinct took over. She lunged for the water barrel, her fingers fumbling with the knot that held it secure. The rope wouldn't budge. Behind her, she heard a soft whooshing sound, and suddenly the smoke wasn't thin anymore. Orange flames licked up the side of the wagon, crackling as they found the sun-dried canvas cover. No, no, no! Victoria abandoned the barrel and ran to the back of the wagon, throwing open the gate. She needed to save what she could. Her mother's quilt, the deed to her uncle's land, the small wooden box containing her parents' wedding rings. But the moment she yanked the gate open, a backdraft of heat hit her face, forcing her to stumble backward. The interior was already filling with smoke, and she could see flames spreading along the floorboards. She grabbed the first thing within reach, a leather satchel, and pulled it free. Then she reached in again, coughing as smoke stung her eyes and throat. Her fingers closed around something, fabric maybe, but the heat was too intense. She had to let go and back away, tears streaming down her face from the smoke and the horrible realization that everything was burning. The oxen were bellowing now, terrified by the fire and pulling against their yoke. Victoria ran to them, trying to calm them even as her own heart hammered against her ribs. She had to get them free before they hurt themselves or the burning wagon somehow spooked them into a stampede. She was struggling with the yoke pins when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Fast ones. Victoria looked up, squinting against the sun and smoke, and saw a rider approaching at full gallop. For a wild moment, fear overtook even her panic about the fire. She was a woman alone, miles from anywhere with no protection. But she had no time to worry about that because the flames were now engulfing the entire wagon, popping and roaring as they consumed her life. The rider pulled up in a cloud of dust. Victoria had a quick impression of a tall man on a paint horse, wearing a dusty brown hat and a dark vest over a sun-faded blue shirt. Then he was off the horse in one fluid motion, not even bothering to tie the reins. "Get away from there!" His voice was rough, urgent. He didn't wait for her to respond. He grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the wagon just as a barrel inside exploded with a crack, sending burning debris flying. Victoria stumbled but caught herself. The man was already running back to his horse, yanking a canvas bag from his saddle. He pulled out what looked like a tightly rolled wool blanket, ran to the wagon, and began beating at the flames. "Water!" he shouted. "You got water?" Victoria's brain kicked back into gear. "Barrel on the side. I couldn't get it free." He tossed her the blanket. "Keep at the ground fire. Don't let it spread to the grass." Then he was at the water barrel, and his knife flashed in the sunlight as he cut through the rope in one stroke. He hefted the barrel, and Victoria was struck by the casual strength in the motion. It had to weigh 60 pounds at least. He appended it over the wagon's burning frame, and steam hissed into the air as water met fire. Victoria beat at the small flames that had spread to the grass around the wagon, her arms already aching from the effort. The wool blanket was heavy and awkward, but it worked. She stamped and smothered, while behind her the man continued to fight the main blaze. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Gradually, the roar of the fire diminished to a crackle, then to a hiss, then to smoking silence. Victoria straightened, her back screaming in protest, and turned to survey the damage. The wagon was destroyed. The canvas cover was completely gone, burned away to nothing. The wooden sides were charred and collapsed inward. The contents, everything she'd brought from Missouri, everything she owned, were reduced to smoking, unrecognizable lumps of ash and twisted metal. The man stood beside the wreckage, the empty water barrel at his feet, his chest heaving from exertion. His face was streaked with soot and sweat, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He looked at the destroyed wagon, then at her, and his expression was grim but not unkind. "I'm sorry," he said. "Got here as fast as I could." Victoria opened her mouth but found she couldn't speak. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her with suffocating weight. Everything was gone. Her clothes, her food, her tools, her mother's quilt that had been the only real piece of home she'd carried with her. The money she'd sewn into the lining of her spare dress. Gone. All of it gone. Her knees went weak, and suddenly she was sitting in the dirt, the burned blanket fallen beside her. She stared at the smoking ruins and felt herself start to shake. The man crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, she could see he had gray eyes, striking against his sun-browned skin, and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30. There was something steady about him, something solid, that made her feel fractionally less like she was falling apart. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Victoria shook her head. She didn't trust herself to speak yet. "That's good." He glanced back at the wagon, then at her again. "You traveling alone?" She found her voice, though it came out rough and strained. "Yes." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't comment on the foolishness of that decision. Instead, he said, "You got any other supplies? Anything that wasn't in the wagon?" "The satchel." She looked around and spotted it where she'd dropped it several feet away. "That's all I managed to grab." He retrieved it and handed it to her. Victoria opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were 2 tins of food, a small pot, and a box of matches. Nothing of real value. Nothing that would help her survive. "Lost the wagon," the man said, and his voice was matter-of-fact but not cold. "But kept you. That's what matters." Victoria looked up at him, surprised by the simple conviction in his words. He met her gaze steadily, and she saw he meant it. To him, the fact that she was alive and unhurt was genuinely more important than the material loss. "Easy to say when it wasn't your life that just burned up," she said, and was immediately ashamed of the bitterness in her tone. He'd just saved what remained of that life after all. But he didn't seem offended. "Fair enough," he said, "but I've lost everything before, more than once, and I'm still here. You will be too." He stood and offered her his hand. After a moment, Victoria took it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but careful. He pulled her to her feet with easy strength. "Name's Xavier Cross," he said. "I've got a camp about 2 miles south of here. You can come back with me, get some food and water, figure out what to do next." Victoria hesitated. Every rule of survival she'd learned said don't go off alone with a strange man. But what choice did she have? Stay here and die of thirst in the sun? He seemed to read her thoughts. "I understand if you're wary, but I promise you're safe with me. I've got a reputation in these parts, if that helps. Most folks know Xavier Cross as a man who keeps his word." "Victoria Morrow," she said finally. "And I suppose I don't have much choice but to trust you. That's honest at least." He walked over to her oxen, who had calmed now that the fire was out, and began unhitching them from the ruined wagon. "We'll bring these 2 with us. They look like they could use a good rest and some feed." Victoria watched him work, efficient and competent, and felt a strange mix of gratitude and humiliation. She'd been so determined to make this journey on her own, to prove she didn't need anyone's help. Now here she was, dependent on the charity of a stranger. Xavier led the oxen over to his paint horse, which had remained remarkably calm through all the chaos. He fashioned a quick lead rope, then turned to Victoria. "Can you ride?" "Not well," she admitted. "That's all right. Horse is steady." He swung up into the saddle, then offered his hand again. "Put your foot on mine and I'll pull you up. You'll have to ride behind me." Victoria's face heated. Riding behind him meant sitting close, holding on to him. It was improper by any standard she'd been raised with. But then again, everything about her situation was beyond the bounds of propriety now. She did as he instructed, and with surprising ease, he pulled her up behind him. The horse shifted but didn't spook. Victoria found herself pressed against Xavier's back, close enough to feel the heat of him through his shirt, to smell sweat and smoke and something else, maybe leather or horse or just him. "You'll want to hold on," he said. "Going to move slow because of the oxen, but better safe." Gingerly, Victoria placed her hands on his sides, just above his belt. Even through the fabric, she could feel the solid muscle of his torso. She'd never been this close to a man who wasn't family, and the intimacy of it made her acutely self-conscious. Xavier clicked his tongue and the horse started walking, the oxen plodding along behind on their lead. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Victoria was suddenly aware of how thirsty she was, how exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the fire was draining away, leaving her hollow. They rode in silence for a while. Victoria focused on staying upright, on not thinking too hard about what had just happened or what would happen next. One moment at a time. That was all she could handle. "Where were you headed?" Xavier asked after a while. His voice carried easily despite the fact that he wasn't looking at her. "Oregon Territory. My uncle has land there near Salem. He wrote and said I could come help him run his farm. That's still a long way." "I know." Another stretch of silence. Then Xavier said, "You got any money? Anything valuable that survived?" Victoria thought of the coins sewn into her dress lining, now ash. "No. It was all in the wagon." She felt him nod. "All right, we'll figure something out." The easy certainty in his voice sparked something contrary in her. "You don't have to take responsibility for me. I can manage on my own." "Didn't say you couldn't. But out here, folks help each other. That's how we survive." Victoria bit back another retort. He was right, of course. And he was helping her when he had no obligation to. The least she could do was be gracious about it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for putting out the fire, for helping me. I'm grateful, even if I'm not showing it very well. You just lost everything. You're allowed to be out of sorts." The simple understanding in his words made Victoria's throat tighten. She blinked hard against the sudden sting of tears. She would not cry. Not now. She had to stay strong, stay focused on survival. Xavier's camp turned out to be a tidy setup in a shallow depression near a creek bed. There was a small tent, a well-maintained fire ring, and a string line where he'd hung various supplies to keep them off the ground. 2 additional horses were hobbled nearby, grazing on the sparse grass. "You're a trader?" Victoria guessed, noting the pack setup. "Among other things. I guide wagon trains sometimes, scout for the cavalry when they need it, trade with the tribes when they'll have me. Whatever pays." He dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. "Keeps me moving, which suits me fine." He led the oxen to the creek and let them drink, then hobbled them near his horses. Victoria stood uncertainly in the middle of the camp, unsure what to do with herself. Everything felt surreal, like she was moving through a dream. "Sit," Xavier said, gesturing to a log near the cold fire ring. "I'll get you some water." Victoria sat gratefully. Her legs were trembling now, delayed shock finally catching up with her. Xavier brought her a canteen and she drank deeply, the water warm but wonderful. She hadn't realized how parched she was. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "This morning. Some dried meat and hardtack." He nodded and began pulling items from his packs. "I'll make us something proper. Won't be fancy, but it'll be hot and filling." Victoria watched as he built up the fire with practiced ease, then set a pot of water to boil. He added beans and dried meat and some herbs from a small pouch, then set it to simmer. The smell made her stomach cramp with sudden, fierce hunger. While the food cooked, Xavier brought her a blanket and draped it around her shoulders despite the heat. "You're in shock," he said. "Need to stay warm." She hadn't realized she was shivering. Now that he'd pointed it out, she couldn't stop. Victoria pulled the blanket tighter and watched the flames, trying to gather her scattered thoughts. "How did you see the smoke?" she asked. "There's nothing out here. I was tracking. Saw your wagon from a ridgeline about 3 miles back. Noticed it was stopped. When I saw the smoke start, I came running." He stirred the pot, not looking at her. "Lucky I was in the area." "Lucky," Victoria repeated. It didn't feel like luck. It felt like her entire life had just collapsed. But he was right about one thing. She was alive. That had to count for something. The sun was setting by the time the food was ready, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Xavier served her a generous portion in a tin bowl and handed her a spoon. Victoria ate mechanically at first, then with increasing appetite as her body realized it was being fed. The beans were simple but well-seasoned, the meat tender from long cooking. It was the best thing she'd tasted in weeks. "Good?" Xavier asked. He sat across the fire from her, his own bowl in hand. "Very. Thank you." They ate in companionable silence. The night was coming on fast, stars beginning to prick through the darkening sky. Victoria knew she should be thinking about her next steps, making plans, but her mind felt sluggish and overwhelmed. "You can have the tent tonight," Xavier said when they'd finished eating. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I can't take your shelter." "Yes, you can." His tone brooked no argument. "You've been through hell today. You need proper rest." Victoria wanted to protest further, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. "What about tomorrow?" she asked. "I need to figure out how to get to Oregon. I need to work to earn passage somehow." Xavier leaned back, studying her across the flames. The firelight played across his features, casting his face in alternating shadow and gold. He had a strong face, she thought. Honest. The kind of face you could trust. "Nearest town is Fargo, North Dakota," he said. "About 40 miles north of here." We could head there, see about getting you work. Or you could come with me. I'm heading to Fort Laramie in a couple weeks to meet a wagon train I'm contracted to guide. They might need extra hands. Women especially, to help with cooking and mending and such. You'd let me travel with you? He shrugged. Don't see why not. Could use the company, and you seem capable enough. Victoria considered this. Traveling with Xavier meant spending more time dependent on his charity, but it also meant safety and a potential path forward. And something about him made her feel safe in a way she couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was just the shock talking, but she didn't think so. I'll work for my keep, she said firmly. I won't be deadweight. Didn't figure you would be. A coyote called in the distance, a long wavering howl. Victoria shivered despite the warmth of the blanket and the fire. Get some sleep, Xavier said, his voice gentle. Things will look different in the morning. They always do. Victoria stood, still wrapped in the blanket. At the entrance to the tent, she paused and looked back at him. He was already settling down by the fire, his saddle serving as a pillow, his hat tilted over his eyes. Xavier. Yeah. Lost wagon kept me. That's what matters. She repeated his words from earlier. Thank you for believing that. She couldn't see his face under the hat, but she heard the smile in his voice. Get some rest, Victoria Morrow. Inside the tent, lying on Xavier's bedroll, Victoria stared up at the canvas above her and listened to the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of the prairie night. She'd lost everything today, but she was alive and she had help, and somehow that felt like more than she'd had even when the wagon was still intact. She fell asleep thinking about gray eyes and steady hands and the way he'd pulled her up from the ground as if she weighed nothing at all. Victoria woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The broken wheel, the fire, Xavier. She sat up quickly, her heart racing, and had to breathe through a wave of panic. Outside the tent, she could hear Xavier moving around the camp. Morning light filtered through the canvas, telling her it was well past dawn. She'd slept hard and dreamlessly, exhausted beyond measure. Victoria combed her hair as best she could and wished desperately for a mirror, or at least clean water to wash her face. She must look a fright, but then what did it matter? Xavier had already seen her at her worst yesterday. She emerged from the tent to find him crouched by the fire, turning bacon in a pan. He looked up when he heard her and nodded a greeting. Morning. Coffee's ready if you want some. Please. He poured her a cup from the pot at the edge of the fire. Victoria wrapped her hands around it gratefully. The morning air was cool, a sharp contrast to yesterday's blazing heat. How'd you sleep? Xavier asked. Better than I expected. He smiled, just a slight quirk of his lips, but it transformed his face, made him look younger, more approachable. Good. You needed it. They ate breakfast together, bacon and the last of some bread he'd been carrying. It was a simple meal, but Victoria was grateful for every bite. She was also acutely aware that she was eating his food, using his supplies, imposing on his generosity. I meant what I said last night, she said, about working for my keep. What can I do to help? Xavier considered this while he chewed. Can you cook? Yes. So? Well enough. Then you can take over camp duties. I'll handle the hunting and navigation. You handle the food and keeping things tidy. He paused. Also, if you know anything about healing, that's a valuable skill. My mother was a midwife. She taught me some. Xavier's eyebrows rose. That's useful. Most wagon trains are desperate for someone with medical knowledge. He stood and began packing up the breakfast things. If you're serious about coming with me to Fort Laramie, you could probably earn a spot on the wagon train west just with that skill. Hope fluttered in Victoria's chest. Really? Really? Like I said, we'll figure something out. They broke camp with efficient teamwork. Victoria found she enjoyed having tasks to focus on, problems to solve that weren't about existential survival. She cleaned the dishes while Xavier saddled the horses and loaded the packs. Within an hour, they were ready to move. "We'll head north," Xavier said, helping her mount the paint horse before swinging up behind her this time. "Make for Fargo. It'll take us 2, maybe 3 days at an easy pace. We need to get your oxen somewhere they can rest properly, and you need proper clothes and supplies." Victoria looked down at her smoke-stained, dirt-crusted dress. "I don't have money for supplies. I'll stake you. You can pay me back once you're earning." Pride warred with practicality. Practicality won. "All right, but I'm keeping track of every penny. I will pay you back." Never doubted it. They rode north through country that was both beautiful and harsh. The prairie stretched endlessly, rolling gently beneath a vast sky. They passed scattered cottonwoods marking creek beds, saw antelope bounding away in the distance, watched hawks wheeling overhead. It was lonely country, empty country, but there was a stark grandeur to it that Victoria found herself appreciating despite everything. This time she sat in front of Xavier in the saddle, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins. It was even more intimate than yesterday, and Victoria was burningly aware of every point where their bodies touched. But it was also practical, he'd explained. This way she could rest against him if she got tired, and he could steady her if the horse spooked. They talked as they rode, tentative at first, then with growing ease. Xavier told her about his life on the frontier, how he'd come west from Virginia after the war ended 2 years prior. He'd been a cavalry scout for the Union Army, he said, and had fallen in love with the territories. He had no family left back east, no ties pulling him back, so he'd stayed and made his living as a guide and trader. Victoria told him about her life in Missouri, about losing both her parents to fever last winter, about the letter from her uncle offering her a fresh start. She didn't mention how desperate she'd been to leave, how the pitying looks from neighbors had felt like weights dragging her down, how everyone had expected her to marry the widower who'd started calling on her even though she barely knew him and couldn't stand his company. "It must have taken courage," Xavier said, "setting out alone like that. Or foolishness. Maybe both." Courage and foolishness often look the same from the outside. Victoria smiled despite herself. "That's a tactful way of putting it. I try." They stopped at midday to water the horses and stretch their legs. Xavier walked the perimeter of their resting spot, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Victoria watched him and realized he was always alert, always aware. It was the awareness of a man who'd survived by being careful. "Are we in danger?" she asked. He glanced at her. "Out here, you're always in some kind of danger. Weather, animals, terrain. Could be bandits, though they usually stick closer to the main trails. Could be a Sioux or Cheyenne raiding party, though we're pretty far south of their usual territory." He shrugged. "Mostly I'm just careful by habit." "Does that ever get exhausting?" "What?" "Being careful all the time. Always watching." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it keeps me alive." They remounted and continued north. The sun beat down fierce and bright. Victoria was grateful for the hat Xavier had given her from his spare supplies. Without it, she'd have been burned red within an hour. As the afternoon wore on, Victoria found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride. Her body learned to move with the horse, and she grew accustomed to Xavier's presence behind her. There was something comforting about his solid strength, the steady way he guided the horse. She felt safe in a way she hadn't since her parents died. They made camp that evening near a small spring Xavier knew about. While he tended the horses, Victoria gathered what burnable wood she could find and got a fire started. She was pleased when it caught on her first try, the lessons from the trail serving her well. Dinner was beans again, but she added wild onions Xavier had dug up and some prairie turnips that made the meal more interesting. He complimented her cooking, which gave her an absurd amount of pleasure. After dinner, they sat on opposite sides of the fire. The night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead in impossible profusion. Victoria had never seen the sky like this back in Missouri. Here, far from any town or settlement, the stars were so thick they looked like clouds of silver dust. "Tell me about Fort Laramie," she said. "What's it like?" Xavier leaned back, looking up at the stars. "Busy. It's a major stop on the Oregon Trail, so there's always wagon trains coming through. Soldiers, traders, Indians coming in to trade or parley. It's got a rough energy to it. Lots of people passing through with dreams and plans." He looked at her. "You'll probably find it overwhelming after being on the trail. Will the wagon train I'm hoping to join be a good one? The one I'm guiding? Should be. They're a solid group, mostly families from Illinois. Good people, well prepared. The trail boss is a man named Thornton, ex-cavalry like me. He runs a tight outfit. And you think they'll take me on? With your medical skills? Absolutely. Might even pay you, not just room and board." Victoria absorbed this. The possibility of actually earning money, of rebuilding her savings, was almost too good to believe. "How long does it take to get to Oregon from Fort Laramie?" "For months, give or take. Depends on weather and terrain and how fast the group moves. We'll be leaving in early September, which means we should reach Oregon before the snow closes the mountain passes. For more months on the trail. For more months of hardship and uncertainty. But 4 months that would end with her reaching her destination, starting her new life. Victoria found she could endure a lot for that promise. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you guide the trains all the way through, or do you stop at some point?" "I'll take this one all the way to the Willamette Valley. That's part of my contract." "So you'll be going to Oregon too?" "This time, yes." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "But you don't stay anywhere, do you? You just keep moving." Xavier met her gaze across the fire. "Staying puts down roots. Roots tie you to a place. I prefer being free to go where I want, when I want." Victoria thought about this, about a life without ties or commitments. Part of her envied the freedom he described. But another part, the part that had loved her home and mourned its loss, couldn't imagine such rootlessness. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked quietly. For a long moment, Xavier didn't answer. Then he said, "Sometimes. But lonely is better than trapped." There was a story there, Victoria sensed. Something that had made him choose this solitary, wandering life. But she didn't pry. They barely knew each other, after all, despite the strange intimacy of their situation. "You should sleep," Xavier said, breaking the contemplative silence. "Tomorrow's another long day." Victoria nodded and retreated to the tent. But she lay awake for a long time, listening to Xavier move around the camp, banking the fire, checking on the horses. She thought about his words. Lonely is better than trapped. She wondered what had trapped him, and when, and why he'd chosen this particular escape. The second day of riding passed much like the first. They made good time, the horses and oxen holding up well. Xavier pointed out landmarks and wildlife, teaching her to read the land the way he did. Victoria found herself fascinated by his knowledge, the easy way he moved through this wild country. They talked more, sharing stories and opinions. Victoria learned that Xavier had been born in Richmond, the son of a horse breeder. He joined the cavalry at 18 and spent the war years riding and fighting and learning to survive in hostile territory. When his parents died during the war, both taken by pneumonia within days of each other, he'd had no reason to return to Virginia. So he'd headed west instead, looking for something he still couldn't quite name. Victoria told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her father's dry goods store and her mother's midwifery practice. She told him about the fever that had swept through town last December, taking both her parents within a week of each other. She described the hollow feeling of being suddenly alone in the world, of having to sell the store and the house to pay debts, of facing a future that looked dark and uncertain. "Your uncle's your only family?" Xavier asked. "My only living family, yes. He's my mother's brother. I barely know him, really. He left for Oregon when I was young. But he's all I have now." "That why you were so set on making the trip alone?" "Pride." Victoria bristled. "Necessity. I couldn't afford to book passage on a wagon train, not after settling my parents' debts. I had enough for a wagon and supplies, and that was it." "Hey!" Xavier's voice was gentle. Wasn't criticizing. "I understand doing what you have to do to survive." She relaxed slightly. "I'm sorry. I'm defensive about it. Everyone back home thought I was crazy. Maybe I was." "You were brave," Xavier said firmly. "Brave and desperate, maybe, but brave all the same. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you different." The simple validation made Victoria's throat tighten. She was saved from having to respond by Xavier suddenly going tense behind her, his hand moving to the rifle secured to his saddle. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders. 3 of them, coming from the northeast." Victoria's heart jumped into her throat. She couldn't see anything, but she trusted Xavier's eyes. "Dangerous. Don't know yet. Just stay calm." They kept riding, but Xavier subtly changed their course, angling toward a small rise that would give them the high ground. Within minutes, Victoria could see the riders too, 3 men on horseback, moving at a steady pace toward them. "They see us?" she asked. "Definitely." The riders changed direction to intercept them. Xavier reined in his horse and waited, his posture relaxed but ready. Victoria could feel the tension in him, coiled and prepared. The 3 men drew close enough for Victoria to make out details. They were rough-looking, dressed in a mix of buckskin and worn wool, their faces weathered and hard. 2 of them had rifles across their saddles. The third, a big man with a thick beard, was smiling in a way that made Victoria's skin crawl. "Afternoon," the bearded man called out as they approached. His eyes flicked over Xavier dismissively and settled on Victoria with uncomfortable intensity. "That's a pretty lady you got there." "Afternoon," Xavier replied, his voice neutral. "Just passing through." "Aren't we all?" The bearded man urged his horse closer. The other 2 men spread out slightly, bracketing them. "Name's Garrett. These are my associates. We work security for the trail, help out travelers who might be having trouble." "That's real charitable of you," Xavier said, and there was a hint of steel under the pleasant tone. "But we're doing just fine." "You sure about that?" "Lady looks like she's been through something rough." Garrett's eyes raked over Victoria's ruined dress, her disheveled appearance. "You in some kind of trouble, madam?" Victoria found her voice. "My wagon caught fire. Mr. Cross here is helping me get to the nearest town." "How unfortunate." Garrett didn't sound sympathetic. "That why you only got 1 horse between you? And those raggedy oxen?" "Like she said, wagon burned," Xavier said. His hand rested casually near his rifle. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to make ground before dark." "Hold on now." Garrett held up a hand. "No need to be unfriendly. We're just concerned citizens. In fact, maybe we should escort you. These trails can be dangerous for a lady." "We're managing," Xavier said flatly. One of the other men, a lean fellow with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "Seems odd. A lady traveling with just 1 man. No wagon, no supplies to speak of. Some might think there's something improper going on." The implication hung in the air. Victoria felt her face heat with anger and humiliation. Before she could speak, Xavier's voice cut through, sharp as a knife. And some might think 3 men cornering a woman on an empty trail looks a lot like banditry. Interesting how perspective works. The temperature of the exchange dropped instantly. Garrett's false smile vanished. That's a dangerous accusation, friend. Just making an observation, Xavier said. Same as you. For a tense moment, nobody moved. Victoria could feel her heart hammering. Then Garrett laughed, though there was no humor in it. You got fire, I'll give you that. He looked at Xavier more carefully this time, taking in the rifle, the way he sat his horse, the steadiness of his gaze. You got a military bearing. Cavalry? Was. Figured. You got that look. Garrett gathered his reins. All right, we'll leave you to it. But word of advice? Woman traveling like this, in her condition, people are going to talk. Might want to think about that. He wheeled his horse around and the other 2 followed. They rode off at a canter, heading northwest. Xavier didn't move until they were well out of sight. Are they really gone? Victoria asked. For now. But they might circle back once it's dark. See if we're worth robbing. Xavier urged the horse forward at a faster pace. We're going to put some distance between us and here, then make a cold camp tonight. No fire. You think they'll come back? Better to assume the worst and be wrong than the other way around. They rode hard for the next 2 hours, until the sun was setting and the horses were lathered. Xavier led them into a small canyon with steep sides, a defensible position. He helped Victoria down from the horse, then quickly saw to the animals while she gathered their few supplies. We'll take turns on watch, Xavier said, checking his rifle. You get some sleep first. I'll wake you in a few hours. I don't know how to shoot, Victoria admitted. You won't have to. Just watch and listen. If you see or hear anything unusual, wake me. They ate a cold dinner of jerky and dried apples. Without the fire, the night felt oppressive, full of shadows and strange sounds. Victoria wrapped herself in a blanket and tried to rest, but anxiety kept her wakeful. Xavier, she said quietly into the darkness. Yeah, thank you for standing up to them. Those men were looking for easy prey. Best way to deal with that type is show them you're not. Still, you could have just let them take your supplies and gone on your way. But you didn't. She heard him shift position. You're not a supply, Victoria. You're a person under my protection. That means something. The simple declaration warmed her more than any fire could have. She closed her eyes and finally drifted off, feeling safer than she had any right to given the circumstances. Xavier woke her sometime in the deep hours of night. Victoria took his position, sitting with her back against a rock face, watching the entrance to their canyon. The stars wheeled overhead, marking the slow passage of time. She heard nothing but wind and the occasional movement of the horses. When dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Xavier woke again. See anything? Nothing. Good. Let's move out. They were on the trail within minutes, both of them silent and watchful. But the morning passed without incident, and gradually Victoria felt herself relax. Whatever Garrett and his men had been up to, apparently they'd decided Xavier wasn't worth the trouble. By midday, they crested a rise and saw buildings in the distance. Fargo, Xavier said. We made good time. Fargo turned out to be a rough frontier town, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street. There was a general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, and what looked like a boarding house. People moved along the dusty street. Men in work clothes, a few women in calico dresses, some Sioux in traditional dress trading at the general store. Xavier led them to a livery stable, where he arranged boarding for the horses and oxen. The owner, a grizzled man named Stevens, looked at Victoria's worn appearance and Xavier's protective stance, and drew his own conclusions. But he was polite enough not to voice them. From the livery, they walked to the general store. Xavier bought supplies methodically: food, ammunition, a new blanket, rope. When he started looking at dresses, Victoria stopped him. "I can't let you buy me clothes. You need them. I know, but it's not proper. It's too much." Xavier looked at her steadily. "Victoria, your dress is falling apart. You need something decent to wear, especially if you're going to be joining a wagon train. This isn't charity, it's practicality. But people will think. Let them think what they want. You and I know the truth." Victoria bit her lip. He was right, of course. She did need clothes. But the intimacy of having a man buy her a dress felt overwhelming. In the end, she selected the most practical dress she could find: a simple blue calico, along with a spare chemise and stockings. Xavier paid without comment, adding a sunbonnet and a pair of sturdy gloves. Victoria kept mental track of every penny, determined to repay him. They took a room at the boarding house, which raised more eyebrows until Xavier explained they needed 2 rooms. The proprietor, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Hendricks, relaxed slightly and showed them to adjacent rooms on the 2nd floor. "Dinner's at 6, she said. "You're welcome to wash up. There's a pump out back." Victoria had never been more grateful for anything than the opportunity to wash. She pumped cold water into the basin in her room and scrubbed her face and hands, then brushed out her hair as best she could. The new dress fit well enough, though it was a bit loose in the bodice. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older, harder, changed. There was a knock at her door. "Victoria? You decent?" "Yes, come in." Xavier entered, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "That's better. You look more yourself." Victoria wasn't sure she had a self anymore, but she appreciated the sentiment. "Thank you again. For everything." "Stop thanking me. We're partners now, remember? Partners help each other." Partners. The word settled something in Victoria's chest, gave her back a sense of purpose and dignity that charity alone couldn't provide. They went down to dinner together. Mrs. Hendricks served fried chicken and potatoes and greens, and Victoria ate until she was pleasantly full. Other boarders came and went, mostly men traveling for business. Some of them stared at Victoria and Xavier with open curiosity, but Xavier's steady presence discouraged any unwanted conversation. After dinner, they sat on the boarding house porch in the cooling evening air. The main street was quieter now, just a few people moving in the dusk. From the saloon came the sound of a piano playing badly and men's rough laughter. "How long will we stay here?" Victoria asked. "Day or 2. Give the animals a proper rest, replenish supplies." Xavier was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with easy skill. "Also need to check if there's any word about that wagon train. Thornton might have sent ahead to let me know if plans have changed. And if they have, then we adapt." Victoria watched his hands work, creating shape from shapeless wood. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. Might not answer." "Why do you do this? The guiding, the wandering. You're clearly capable of settling down, building something stable. Why don't you?" Xavier was quiet for a long time. The knife flashed in the lamplight from the window behind them. Finally, he said, "I was engaged once, before the war. Her name was Margaret. She was beautiful and kind and everything I thought I wanted." Victoria waited, sensing there was more. "I went off to war. Spent 4 years riding and fighting and watching men die. When I came back, I was different. Harder. I had nightmares, couldn't settle. Margaret tried to be patient, but I could see I was making her miserable. So I ended it. Told her to find someone who could give her the peaceful life she deserved. Did she?" Don't know. I left before I could find out. He set down the whittling. Point is, I learned I'm not built for that kind of life anymore. I need space and movement and the freedom to leave when things get too heavy. It's lonely sometimes, like you said, but it's honest. I'd rather be alone than pretend to be someone I'm not. Victoria absorbed this. That must have been hard. Giving up someone you loved. Hardest thing I ever did. But it was the right thing. He looked at her. What about you? No one waiting for you back in Missouri. No. There was a man, a widower named Horace, who started calling on me after my parents died. But I couldn't stand him. He was looking for a mother for his children and a housekeeper, not a wife. So when my uncle's letter came, I saw my way out and took it. Good. Life's too short to spend it with the wrong person. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Victoria felt a strange contentment despite everything that had happened. Yes, she'd lost her wagon and her possessions. But she'd gained something too. A friend, maybe, or at least an ally. Someone who saw her as a person, not just a problem or an obligation. I should turn in, Xavier said eventually. Want to get an early start in the morning. Victoria nodded and stood. At the door to her room, she turned back. Xavier, I'm glad it was you who found me. I don't think I'd have made it this far with anyone else. He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his face. You're stronger than you think, Victoria Morrow. You'd have made it. But I'm glad I could help. Victoria slept well that night, truly well for the first time since leaving Missouri. The bed was soft, the room was safe, and she felt less alone than she had in months. The next morning, Xavier went to check for messages while Victoria explored the town. She wandered into the general store, where the proprietor, a friendly man named Mr. Chun, told her about life in Fargo. Town's only been here 5 years, he said. Started as a trading post, grew from there. We get all kinds through here. Traders heading to the Dakota territories, settlers going west, soldiers from Fort Abercrombie. It's a good place to rest before the real wilderness starts. Victoria bought a few small items with the little bit of money Xavier had insisted she take. A needle and thread, a bar of soap, a small journal. If she was going to be traveling for months more, she wanted to record the journey somehow. She was leaving the store when she nearly collided with a woman about her own age, carrying a basket of supplies. The woman steadied her with a quick hand. Oh, I'm so sorry, Victoria said. No harm done. The woman smiled. She had warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. You're new in town. I'd remember seeing you before. Just passing through. My name's Victoria Morrow. Emma Sullivan. Pleased to meet you. Emma's eyes took in Victoria's new dress, her sun-weathered face. Traveling the trail? Yes, or I was. My wagon burned. Oh, how awful. But you're all right. There was genuine concern in Emma's voice that made Victoria warm to her immediately. I'm fine. A friend is helping me reach Fort Laramie. Friend. Emma's eyebrows rose slightly. Would this friend be Xavier Cross by any chance? Victoria blinked in surprise. You know him? Everyone knows Xavier Cross. He comes through Fargo a few times a year. Emma's expression turned shrewd. He's a good man. Honorable. You're lucky he found you. That's what I keep thinking. Emma hesitated, then said, Look, I know this is forward of me, but would you like to come for tea? My husband's at the mill until evening, and I'd love the company. It's been ages since I had another woman to talk to. Victoria found herself accepting. Emma led her to a small but tidy house on the edge of town, where she boiled water and served tea with sugar cookies she'd baked that morning. Over tea, Emma told her story. She and her husband Michael had come west from Pennsylvania 3 years ago, looking for a fresh start. Michael had taken over the lumber mill when the previous owner died, and they'd built a life here in Fargo. It wasn't always easy, Emma said, but it was theirs. Do you ever regret leaving? Victoria asked. Sometimes. I miss my family. But this is where Michael's work is, and I love him, so this is where I am. Emma refilled their cups. What about you? What's in Oregon? Victoria explained about her uncle, her parents' deaths, her determination to build a new life. Emma listened with sympathetic attention. That's remarkably brave, Emma said. I traveled west with my husband and his brother's family. I can't imagine doing it alone. I'm starting to realize it wasn't my smartest decision. Maybe not smart, but courageous all the same. Emma leaned forward. Can I give you some advice, woman to woman? Please. Xavier Cross is a good man, but he's also a man who doesn't settle. Don't fall for him. Victoria felt her face heat. It's not like that. Not yet, maybe. But I saw the way you said his name, the way your whole face changed. I recognized that look. Emma's voice was kind but firm. I'm not saying don't be friends. I'm saying protect your heart. Men like Xavier, they're married to the trail. They don't change, no matter how much you might wish they would. Victoria wanted to protest, to insist that her relationship with Xavier was purely practical. But Emma's words had touched something she'd been trying not to examine too closely. The way her heart lifted when Xavier smiled at her. The sense of safety and rightness she felt in his presence. The intimacy of riding together, eating together, sharing stories under the stars. I'll be careful, she said quietly. Good. Emma squeezed her hand. Now, tell me more about this wagon train you're hoping to join. Victoria spent the rest of the afternoon with Emma, and by the time she returned to the boarding house, she felt both comforted and unsettled. Emma's warning echoed in her mind. Don't fall for him. But what if it was already too late? Xavier was waiting on the porch when she returned. He stood as she approached, and Victoria's traitorous heart did that little flip again. Where'd you disappear to? He asked. Met a woman named Emma Sullivan. She invited me for tea. Emma's good people. She and Michael have done well for themselves here. He gestured to the chairs. I got word about the wagon train. They're ahead of schedule. I need to meet them at Fort Laramie in 10 days, not 2 weeks. Victoria's stomach dropped. 10 days? But that's a hard ride, I know. We'll need to leave tomorrow at first light and push the pace. He studied her face. You up for it? Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. You could stay here, find work in Fargo, maybe book passage on a train next year when you've saved enough. His gray eyes were serious. I won't think less of you if that's what you decide. Victoria thought about it. Staying in Fargo would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. But safe hadn't gotten her this far. And the thought of saying goodbye to Xavier now, before they even reached Fort Laramie, felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. I'm coming with you, she said firmly. I didn't come this far to give up now. Xavier smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They spent the evening preparing for the journey. Xavier bought additional supplies and arranged for fresh horses, trading 2 of his older mounts for younger, stronger ones. Victoria spent her time mending clothes and organizing their packs, trying to be useful. That night at dinner, Mrs. Hendricks pulled Victoria aside. You watch yourself with that man, she said in a low voice. I've seen plenty of girls get their hearts broken following after cowboys and drifters. We're just traveling companions, Victoria insisted. Mrs. Hendricks gave her a look that said she didn't believe that for a second. Maybe that's true now, but the trail has a way of changing things. You be careful. 2 warnings in 1 day. Victoria tried to tell herself they were unnecessary, that she had her feelings perfectly under control. But lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't stop thinking about Xavier. The way his hands moved when he worked, the rare sound of his laugh, the feeling of safety that came from being near him. Emma was right. She was already falling. The question was what to do about it. They left Fargo before dawn, when the town was still wrapped in darkness and silence. The horses were fresh and eager, covering ground quickly. Xavier had plotted a route that would take them more directly south to Fort Laramie, cutting across country rather than following the established trail. "It'll be rougher going," he warned, "but we'll save 2 days if we push hard." Victoria didn't complain. She was learning to ride better, adjusting to the long hours in the saddle. Her body ached constantly, but she gritted her teeth and endured. They rode hard that first day, stopping only to water the horses and snatch quick meals. The landscape changed as they traveled south, becoming more rugged and dramatic. They passed through badlands carved by wind and water into strange shapes, crossed creeks running cold and clear from distant mountains, climbed ridges that gave them views stretching to the horizon. Xavier taught her as they went, pointing out landmarks and explaining how to read the land. He showed her which plants were edible, which animal tracks meant danger, how to find water in seemingly dry country. Victoria absorbed it all, grateful for the knowledge and for the distraction from her growing feelings. On the third night out from Fargo, they made camp in a sheltered valley. Xavier shot a rabbit, and Victoria roasted it over the fire along with wild onions and cattail roots she'd gathered. It was the best meal they'd had in days. After dinner, they sat by the fire. Xavier was cleaning his rifle, a ritual he performed every night. Victoria was writing in her journal, recording the day's events and her thoughts. "What are you writing?" Xavier asked. "Just notes about the journey. I thought maybe someday I'd want to remember all this." "Can I ask what you're writing about me?" Victoria felt her face heat. "What makes you think I'm writing about you?" "Well, we've been traveling together for over a week. I figure I must come up in there somewhere." "You do," she admitted. "I'm writing about how you saved me, how you've taught me to survive out here. How grateful I am. Just gratitude." The question hung between them. Victoria looked up from her journal and found Xavier watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What else would there be?" she asked carefully. Xavier set down the rifle. "I don't know. You tell me." Victoria's heart was hammering now. This felt like a precipice, a moment that would change everything depending on what she said next. "I think," she said slowly, "that you're one of the finest men I've ever met. I think you're strong and kind and honorable. I think I feel safer with you than I've felt in my entire life." "But," Xavier prompted, "but I also think Emma Sullivan was right when she warned me not to fall for you. Because you don't settle down, and I need a home, and those two things don't fit together." Xavier was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Emma talked to you about me? She told me you're married to the trail. That men like you don't change. She's not wrong." Xavier poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I've always figured I'd die out here somewhere, under the stars. Never saw myself getting old in a house with a fence and neighbors. Then why ask me what I was writing? Because something's changed. I don't know what or when, but it has." He looked at her again, and the vulnerability in his expression made Victoria's chest ache. "I keep thinking about what I said when your wagon burned. Lost wagon, kept you, that's what matters. At the time, I just meant you were alive and that was the important thing. But lately, I've been thinking about it differently." "How?" "Like maybe keeping you around is what matters. Not just for now, but longer. Like maybe I don't want to say goodbye at Fort Laramie." Victoria couldn't breathe. "Xavier, I know what you're going to say. That I'm not the settling kind, that you need stability, that this is crazy. And you'd be right. But I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting to hear what you think about things. Can't stop looking forward to making you smile. And I don't know what to do about that." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Victoria set down her journal with trembling hands. "I think about you too," she whispered. "All the time. And it scares me because Emma's right, this doesn't make sense. We want different things. Do we? Or do we just think we do because that's what we've always believed about ourselves?" Xavier stood and crossed to her side of the fire. He crouched down in front of her, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes. "I'm not saying I have answers," he said. "I'm not saying I know how to be what you need. But I'm saying I'd like to try. If you're willing." Victoria's mind was spinning. This was everything she wanted and everything she was afraid of, all wrapped up together. If she said yes, she was risking her heart on a man who might leave, who might never learn to stay. But if she said no, she'd always wonder what might have been. "I'm willing," she said finally. "But Xavier, I need you to understand something. I've lost so much already. My parents, my home, everything I owned. I can't lose myself too. If we do this, I need to know you're in it for real, not just until the next town or the next trail calls to you." "I understand." Xavier reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "And I can't promise it'll be easy, or that I won't make mistakes. But I can promise I'll try. That's all I've got, Victoria. My word that I'll try." It should have felt insufficient. But looking into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, Victoria knew it was enough. He was offering her what he had, holding nothing back. That was more than most people ever gave. "Then let's try," she said. Xavier smiled, that full, transformative smile. Then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might pull away. But Victoria leaned into it, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart beating fast and strong. The kiss deepened, and Victoria felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I've been wanting to do that since Fargo," Xavier admitted. "Only since Fargo?" "All right, since the first night, when you told me thank you in that fierce way you have. But Fargo's when I admitted it to myself." Victoria laughed, giddy and nervous and exhilarated all at once. "What do we do now?" "Now we keep traveling to Fort Laramie. We get you on that wagon train, and we figure out the rest as we go." "That's not much of a plan." "It's the only plan I've got." They sat together by the fire, Victoria leaning against Xavier's shoulder, his arm around her waist. It felt right in a way that defied logic or reason. Maybe Emma had been wrong. Maybe Xavier could change. Or maybe Victoria could learn to find home in a person rather than a place. Only time would tell. The next 5 days passed in a blur of hard riding and stolen moments. During the day, they pushed the horses to make time. But at night, around the fire, they talked about everything and nothing. Xavier told her about his childhood in Virginia, about his mother who had loved gardens and his father who could gentle any horse. Victoria shared memories of her parents, stories she'd never told anyone else. They kissed again and again. Each time felt like a revelation, a promise of something bigger than both of them. Xavier was careful with her, respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But the attraction between them was undeniable, a current that pulled them together whenever they were close. On the 6th day out from Fargo, they crested a rise and saw Fort Laramie in the distance. "We made it," Victoria said, relief and apprehension mingling in her voice. With a day to spare, Xavier reined in his horse, looking down at the fort. "You ready for this?" "I don't know. I thought I was, but now I'm nervous." "You'll do fine. They're going to love you." They rode down to the fort as the sun was setting. Fort Laramie was bigger than Victoria had expected, a sprawling complex of buildings enclosed by walls. Outside the walls, dozens of wagons were circled, and she could see people moving between them, preparing evening meals and tending to animals. Xavier led them to the wagon camp and asked for Thornton. A weathered man with a gray beard emerged from one of the wagons. "Xavier, you made good time. Had extra motivation." Xavier dismounted and helped Victoria down. "Thornton, this is Victoria Morrow." "Victoria, this is James Thornton, the trail boss I told you about." Thornton looked Victoria over with sharp, assessing eyes. "Madam, Xavier says you're looking to join the train." "Yes, sir. I have medical knowledge, and I'm willing to work hard for my passage." "Medical knowledge?" Thornton's interest sharpened. "What kind?" "My mother was a midwife. I've assisted with births, treated fevers and wounds, set broken bones. I know about medicinal plants and how to use them." Thornton nodded slowly. "We've got families with children, and we lost our last person with medical skills 2 weeks ago. Pneumonia took her." He glanced at Xavier. "She vouch for?" "Absolutely. She's capable and tough. You won't regret taking her on." "All right, Miss Morrow. You're hired. You'll work with the other women on cooking and camp duties, but your primary job is medical care. We'll provide food and a spot in one of the supply wagons for you to sleep. No pay but safe passage to Oregon. That work for you?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you. Welcome to the train. We pull out day after tomorrow at dawn. Xavier will show you around." As Thornton walked away, Victoria turned to Xavier. "I can't believe that worked." "Told you it would." Xavier took her hand, a casual gesture that felt natural now. "Come on. Let me introduce you to some folks." He led her through the camp, pointing out families and explaining the social structure of the wagon train. Everyone seemed to know and respect Xavier, and his endorsement of Victoria opened doors that might otherwise have been closed. They met the Hendersons, a young couple with 3 small children. Mrs. Henderson was heavily pregnant and looked relieved when Xavier explained Victoria's medical background. They met the Langs, an elderly pair traveling to join their son in Portland. They met the Yates family, the Parkers, the Olsons, and half a dozen others. By the time night fell fully, Victoria's head was spinning with names and faces. But she also felt something else, acceptance. These people had welcomed her into their group, given her a role and a purpose. It was more than she dared hope for. Xavier found them a spot on the edge of the camp where they could lay out bedrolls. It was too public for the kind of intimacy they'd shared on the trail, but Victoria was grateful just to be near him. "You'll do great," Xavier said as they settled down for the night. "I can already see these folks warming to you. It's because of you. They trust your judgment. It's because you're trustworthy. I just helped them see it faster." Victoria rolled onto her side to face him. In the darkness, she could barely make out his features, but she could feel the warmth of him nearby. "What happens now?" she asked. "You're guiding the train and I'm on it. That's good. But then what?" "When we reach Oregon." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that. I signed on to guide this train all the way through. That gives us 4 months to figure out what this is between us, what it could be. And after that? After that, we see where we stand. Maybe by then I'll have figured out how to settle down. Or maybe you'll have figured out that you like moving better than staying. Or maybe we'll go our separate ways." He reached out and found her hand in the darkness. "But I'd like to think it'll be the first option." "Me too." They fell asleep holding hands, the sounds of the camp settling around them. The next day was chaos. Thornton called a meeting to go over rules and expectations. The train consisted of 23 wagons, carrying 67 people total. They'd be traveling together for the next 4 months, dependent on each other for survival. Thornton laid down strict rules. Everyone helps, everyone works. No one gets left behind unless they're a danger to the group. Victoria was assigned to work with a group of women responsible for communal cooking and laundry. She also set up a small medical station in one of the supply wagons, using supplies she'd been given access to from the group's common stores. Her first patient came that afternoon. A little boy named Tommy Henderson who had a badly infected splinter in his palm. Victoria cleaned and drained the infection, removed the splinter, and dressed the wound while the boy's mother watched anxiously. "Keep it clean and change the bandage daily," Victoria instructed. "If you see red streaks moving up his arm, come find me immediately. But he should be fine, Mrs. Henderson thanked her profusely, and word spread quickly that the new medical woman knew what she was doing. Over the course of that day and the next, Victoria treated a burned hand, a sprained ankle, a rash, and helped examine Mrs. Henderson to assess how far along her pregnancy was and whether there were any concerns. Between medical duties and camp work, she barely saw Xavier. He was busy checking wagons, assessing supplies, meeting with Thornton and the other men to plan the route. But Victoria felt his eyes on her often, and whenever their paths crossed, he'd find a way to touch her hand or smile at her in a way that made her heart race. On the morning they were set to leave, Victoria stood beside the supply wagon she'd been assigned to, watching the organized chaos of breaking camp. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. All around her, families were loading last-minute items. Men were yoking oxen. Children were running around with barely contained excitement. Xavier appeared at her side, leading his horse. "Ready?" "I think so." "Nervous, but ready. That's natural. First few days are always the hardest." He adjusted his hat, squinting into the rising sun. "I'll be riding up and down the line most of the day, checking on folks. But I'll find you tonight. I'll be here." He leaned in quickly and kissed her cheek, a gesture bold enough to make several nearby women turn and stare. Victoria felt her face heat, but she couldn't bring herself to be upset. Let them stare. Let them think what they wanted. She knew the truth of what was between them, and that was enough. Thornton's voice rang out, "Wagons ho!" And just like that, they were moving. The first week on the trail was an adjustment. Victoria learned the rhythm of wagon train life. Up before dawn to start fires and cook breakfast, walking beside the wagons during the day, stopping at midday for a quick meal, continuing until evening, then the whole routine of making camp and cooking dinner and caring for people who needed medical attention. It was exhausting, but Victoria found she thrived on it. The work gave her purpose, and the other women gradually accepted her into their group. She grew especially close to Sarah Yates, a woman about her age who was traveling with her husband and infant daughter. "I'm glad you're here," Sarah confided one evening as they washed dishes together. "Some of the other women were worried about you at first, traveling alone with Xavier. But we can all see you're decent folk." Victoria didn't mention that she and Xavier were more than travel companions now. That truth would come out in time, but for now she was content to keep it between them. True to his word, Xavier found her every evening. Sometimes it was just for a few minutes, a quick check-in to make sure she was all right. Other times they managed to steal an hour, walking out beyond the wagon circle to talk under the stars. 3 weeks into the journey, Xavier asked her to go riding with him on their rest day. It was the first full day they'd stopped since leaving Fort Laramie, giving the animals and people a chance to recover. Most of the train's inhabitants were washing clothes, repairing equipment, or simply resting. Victoria borrowed a horse and rode out with Xavier to a nearby creek. They dismounted and sat on the bank, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "How are you holding up?" Xavier asked. "Better than I expected. The work is hard, but I like it. I like feeling useful." "You're more than useful. You're invaluable. Half the camp has been singing your praises." Victoria felt pleased but embarrassed. "I'm just doing what anyone with training would do. Don't sell yourself short." Xavier picked up a smooth stone and sent it skipping across the water. "I've been thinking about something." What? About us. About what happens when we reach Oregon. Victoria's heart quickened. And, your uncle's place is near Salem, right? Yes. I've been thinking maybe I could settle somewhere near there. Not right on top of you, but close enough that we could see where this goes without the pressure of being on the trail together. Victoria turned to look at him fully. You'd do that? Give up guiding and trading and moving around? I try. For you, I try. Xavier met her eyes. I can't promise I'll be good at it. I've been drifting for 5 years now. But I think maybe it's time I learned how to stop. Emotion welled up in Victoria's throat. That's a big change to make for someone you've only known a few weeks. 6 weeks, Xavier corrected. And sometimes you just know. I've spent 5 years running from commitment and connection. Maybe I'm tired of running. Victoria reached out and took his hand. I'd like that. You settling near me. Us figuring this out together. Xavier lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. A courtly gesture that made her smile. Then that's what we'll do. They sat by the creek for another hour, talking about the future in concrete terms for the first time. Xavier said he had money saved from his years of work, enough to buy a small piece of land. He'd been thinking about breeding and training horses, something he knew how to do from his childhood. Victoria told him about her uncle's farm, how he'd written that the area was growing, and there were opportunities for people willing to work hard. By the time they returned to camp, Victoria felt like they'd turned a corner. This wasn't just a trail romance anymore. It was a real plan, a real future. The journey continued. They crossed rivers and climbed mountain passes. They endured scorching days and freezing nights. Victoria delivered Mrs. Henderson's baby, a healthy boy they named Peter, in the back of a wagon during a rainstorm. She set a broken arm for one of the Lang boys who fell from his wagon. She treated sunburn and blisters and dysentery and snakebite. And through it all, her relationship with Xavier deepened. They stole moments whenever they could. A conversation while watering horses, a walk in the evening, sitting together during communal meals. The rest of the train noticed, of course. People talked. But Thornton told the gossips to mind their own business. And gradually, people accepted that Xavier and Victoria were courting. 2 months into the journey, they hit their first real crisis. A group of Shoshone warriors appeared on a ridge overlooking the train. Thornton and Xavier rode out to parley, while the rest of the train formed a defensive circle. Victoria waited with the others, her heart in her throat. She'd heard stories about Indian attacks, though Xavier had told her they were rarer than people thought. Most tribes just wanted to trade or ensure the wagon trains passed through their territory without causing damage. After what felt like hours, Xavier and Thornton returned. Xavier caught Victoria's eye and nodded, and she felt relief flood through her. They want to trade, Thornton announced. And they have a wounded man they'd like our medical person to look at. Miss Morrow, you willing? Every eye turned to Victoria. She swallowed hard but nodded. Of course. The Shoshone brought their wounded warrior to the edge of camp. He'd been gored by a buffalo, leaving a deep puncture wound in his thigh that was infected and festering. Victoria cleaned the wound as best she could, applied a poultice of herbs she'd gathered along the trail, and showed his companions how to change the dressing. The warrior's eyes were fever bright, but he endured her treatment stoically. When she was done, one of the other Shoshone men offered her a beautiful beaded necklace as payment. Victoria accepted it with thanks, understanding that refusing would be an insult. After the Shoshone left, Xavier found her. That was brave. I was terrified. I know, but you did it anyway. That's what brave is. He pulled her into a quick embrace, not caring who saw. Victoria leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. That night, lying in her bedroll under the stars, Victoria thought about how much she'd changed since leaving Missouri. The frightened woman whose wagon had caught fire felt like a different person. She'd been tested by this journey, pushed to her limits, and she discovered reserves of courage and capability she hadn't known she possessed. And she'd found Xavier. That felt like the greatest gift of all. The days blended together as they crossed Wyoming and then Idaho. Summer faded into early autumn. The nights grew colder, the days shorter. They were racing the weather now, trying to reach Oregon before the mountain passes became impassable. 3.5 months after leaving Fort Laramie, they crossed into Oregon territory. A cheer went up from the wagon train, people celebrating making it this far. But they still had weeks to go before reaching the Willamette Valley. Victoria found Xavier that evening. He was checking his horse's hooves, always attentive to the details that kept them safe. "We're almost there," she said. "Yeah, another 3 weeks, maybe less if the weather holds." "Are you having second thoughts? About settling?" Xavier straightened and looked at her. "Are you asking if I'm going to change my mind about us?" "Maybe." He crossed to her and took both her hands. "Victoria, I've spent 4 months falling in love with you. Every day I'm more sure that this is what I want. You're what I want. So no, I'm not having second thoughts." Victoria's breath caught. "You love me." "Is that so surprising? You've never said it before." "I'm saying it now. I love you, Victoria Morrow. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you throw yourself into everything you do. I love how you care for people, how you never give up. I love you, and I want to build a life with you." Tears stung Victoria's eyes. "I love you too. I've loved you for weeks, maybe months. I was just afraid to say it." "Why?" "Because saying it makes it real, and real things can be lost." Xavier pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "We can't live in fear of loss. We just have to love each other as hard as we can for as long as we have." Victoria held him tight, breathing in the scent of him, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek. He was right. They couldn't control the future, but they could choose how they lived in the present. "Marry me," Xavier said suddenly. Victoria pulled back to look at him. "What?" "Marry me. When we get to Salem, when we're settled. Marry me and let's build that life together." "Xavier, are you sure? That's a huge commitment." "I know. And 6 months ago, the idea would have terrified me. But now—" He cupped her face in his hands. "Now I can't imagine my life without you in it. So yes, I'm sure. Marry me, Victoria." Joy bloomed in Victoria's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Xavier kissed her, and Victoria kissed him back with all the love and hope and promise she felt. Around them, the camp went about its evening routines, but in that moment, they might as well have been alone in the world. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "We should tell people," Victoria said. "Not yet. Let's keep it just ours for a little while longer." Victoria agreed. This felt too precious, too perfect to share just yet. They'd tell people when they were ready. The final 3 weeks of the journey were some of the hardest. They crossed mountain passes where the wagons had to be lowered down steep slopes with ropes. They forded rivers swollen with autumn rains. 2 wagons broke down and had to be abandoned. The Parkers' oldest son broke his leg, and Victoria said it as best she could, knowing he'd walk with a limp for the rest of his life. But they also saw beauty beyond measure. The forests of Oregon were unlike anything Victoria had ever imagined. Towering trees that seemed to touch the sky, carpets of ferns and moss, rivers running crystal clear. The air smelled of cedar and rain and growing things. And through it all, Xavier was beside her, steady and strong. He guided the train through treacherous terrain, settled disputes, encouraged flagging spirits. Victoria watched him lead and thought about what a good father he'd be, what a good husband. The thought no longer scared her. Instead, it filled her with anticipation. Finally, for months after leaving Fort Laramie, They descended into the Willamette Valley. Salem spread out before them, a real town with actual buildings and roads and all the trappings of civilization. The wagon train came to a halt on the outskirts, and Thornton declared their journey complete. People cheered and cried and embraced each other. They'd made it. After months of hardship and danger, they'd reached their destination. Victoria found Xavier in the chaos. He swept her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "We did it," she said. "We actually made it." Never doubted it for a second. Over the next few days, the wagon train disbanded as families headed off to their final destinations. Victoria said goodbye to Sarah and Mrs. Henderson and all the others she'd grown close to, promising to stay in touch. She and Xavier rode out to find her uncle's farm. It took most of a day, following directions and asking locals. But finally, they found it. A neat homestead with a sturdy house, a barn, and fields that had been recently harvested. Victoria's uncle, Richard Morrow, was a tall man with graying hair and her mother's eyes. He embraced her warmly, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You look just like your mother," he said. "I'm so glad you made it." Victoria introduced Xavier, explaining their engagement. Richard looked Xavier over carefully, then extended his hand. "Any man who got my niece safely across the country is welcome in my home. And if Victoria chose you, that's good enough for me." They stayed with Richard for a week, helping with the harvest and getting to know each other. Richard was a widower, his wife having died 3 years prior, and he was clearly delighted to have family again. He offered to let Victoria stay as long as she wanted, and suggested that Xavier might find good land nearby. Xavier spent his days exploring the area, talking to neighbors, checking out available properties. A week after arriving, he found what he was looking for. 40 acres of good land with a creek running through it, just 5 miles from Richard's farm. The previous owner had died and his family was eager to sell. Xavier bought it with his savings, and suddenly, impossibly, they had a future laid out before them. They were married in October, in Richard's parlor, with Richard and several neighbors as witnesses. Victoria wore a new dress, pale yellow, that Richard had insisted on buying her. Xavier wore a new suit and looked so handsome it made Victoria's heart ache. The ceremony was simple. They spoke vows promising to love and honor each other, to build a life together, to face whatever came as partners. When Xavier kissed her, making her officially his wife, Victoria felt like she was standing at the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life. They moved into a small cabin on their new property the next day. It was rough and needed work, but it was theirs. Xavier immediately began plans to expand it, to make it into a real home. That first winter they worked side by side. Xavier cleared land and built fences and a stable. Victoria planted a garden and began establishing herself as a healer in the community. People came from miles around when they heard there was a woman with medical training, and Victoria found herself busier than she'd ever been. Through it all, they learned to live together, to navigate the small intimacies and irritations of married life. Xavier turned out to be hopeless at cooking but excellent at repairs. Victoria couldn't split wood to save her life but could organize anything. They argued sometimes, usually about small things, but they always made up before bed. At night, lying in Xavier's arms in the bed they'd built together, Victoria would think about that day on the trail when her wagon caught fire. How terrified she'd been, how certain she was that everything was over. She'd lost so much that day. Her possessions, her plans, her illusions of self-sufficiency. But she'd gained so much more. She'd found strength she didn't know she had. She'd discovered her capacity for adaptation and survival. And most importantly, she'd found Xavier. "Lost wagon. Kept you, that's what matters," he'd said. At the time, she'd thought he just meant she'd survived. But now she understood he'd meant something deeper. that people were what mattered, connections and love and the life you built together. Everything else was just stuff. In March, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then his face broke into the most beautiful smile she'd ever seen. "A baby?" he said. "We're having a baby?" "We are." Xavier got up and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for this, for everything." Their son was born in November, almost exactly a year after they'd married. The labor was long and difficult, but Victoria was attended by a skilled midwife from town, and Xavier stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand and giving her water and telling her how strong she was. When the baby finally came, crying lustily, Xavier cut the cord with shaking hands. The midwife cleaned the infant and placed him on Victoria's chest. "He's perfect," Victoria breathed, staring down at the tiny, red-faced creature they'd created. "Just like his mother," Xavier said. They named him Samuel Richard Cross, after no one in particular but because they both loved the name. Samuel had Xavier's gray eyes and Victoria's dark hair, and he ruled their lives with tiny fists and loud demands. Xavier proved to be a wonderful father, patient and attentive. He'd sing Samuel to sleep with old songs from his childhood, walk the floor with him when he was fussy, change diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son, Victoria fell in love with him all over again. The years passed, marked by seasons and milestones. They expanded the house, adding rooms for the children they hoped to have. Xavier built up a successful horse breeding business, gaining a reputation for training gentle, reliable mounts. Victoria's healing practice grew, and she became known throughout the valley as someone you could trust with medical care. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret, after Xavier's former fiancée, which Victoria suggested as a way for Xavier to honor that part of his past, and another son they named Henry. The house rang with noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of family life. Richard remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on his great-nieces and nephew, helping Xavier with the horses, teaching the children about farming. He lived to see Samuel turn 10 before passing peacefully in his sleep, leaving his farm to Victoria with the understanding that it would someday go to the children. Through it all, Xavier never once spoke of leaving, of returning to his wandering ways. He seemed genuinely content with the life they'd built, with the roots they'd put down. But sometimes, on clear nights, Victoria would find him standing outside, looking up at the stars, and she'd wonder if part of him missed the trail. One such night, she came out to stand beside him, taking his hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Settling down?" Xavier looked down at her, surprise in his face. "Regret it? Why would I regret it?" "Because you gave up so much. Your freedom, your wandering. Sometimes I see you looking at the stars, and I wonder if you're thinking about all the places you're not seeing." Xavier was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, "I think about the trail sometimes. Sure, remember the freedom of it, the adventure, but regret settling down." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "Victoria, this life with you, our children, our home, this is the greatest adventure I could have asked for. I'm not giving up anything. I'm gaining everything that matters." "You mean that?" "Every word. Lost Wagon, kept you, that's what matters. I said that the day we met, and it's been true every day since." He kissed her forehead. "You're what matters. This family is what matters. I wouldn't trade this for anything." Victoria leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and believed him. She'd spent years worrying that he'd leave, that his wandering nature would win out. But he'd proven, day after day, year after year, that he'd meant his vows. He'd changed, but so had she. They'd grown together, built something lasting. From inside the house, they heard one of the children cry out, probably Samuel having a nightmare. Xavier sighed and started toward the door. "I'll get him," he said. "You stay and enjoy the quiet." Victoria watched him go. This man who'd saved her and loved her and built a life with her. She thought about that frightened woman on the trail, watching her wagon burn, certain her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what was coming. The heartache and joy, the struggle and triumph, the love that would transform everything. But then, maybe not knowing was part of the journey. Maybe you had to lose everything to discover what truly mattered. Maybe you had to burn down your old life before you could build a new one. Victoria went inside to help with Samuel, stepping into the warm, noisy, perfect chaos of her home. The wagon was long gone, burned to ash years ago. But she'd kept Xavier, and he'd kept her. And together they'd built something better than anything she could have imagined on that desperate day when everything fell apart. And that, Victoria thought as Xavier smiled at her over their son's head, was what truly mattered. Years continued to unfold like pages in a treasured book. Samuel grew into a thoughtful boy who loved horses almost as much as his father did. Margaret proved to have her mother's gift for healing, always bringing home injured birds and strays that needed tending. Henry was the wild one, fearless and adventurous, constantly giving Victoria heart palpitations with his antics. The community around them flourished. Salem grew from a frontier town into a proper city. More families arrived, drawn by stories of fertile land and opportunity. The West was being settled, tamed, though Victoria sometimes mourned the wild beauty she'd known during her journey on the trail. She and Xavier became pillars of their community. Xavier served on the town council, helping make decisions about roads and schools. Victoria trained several younger women in healing arts, passing on what her mother had taught her. Their home was always open, whether for community gatherings or for travelers needing a place to rest. Sometimes old friends from the wagon train would pass through. Sarah Yates visited twice, her family having settled in Portland. Mrs. Henderson and her family stopped by once on their way to visit relatives. Each reunion was precious, a reminder of the journey that had brought them all here. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Victoria with a gift, a beautiful wooden chest he'd made himself, carved with intricate designs. Inside were mementos he'd secretly collected over the years. Her journal from the trail, now filled from cover to cover with her writing. The beaded necklace the Shoshone had given her. A piece of charred wood from her wagon that he'd kept all these years. His own journal where he'd recorded his thoughts about meeting her and falling in love. Victoria cried reading his entries. He'd written about the moment he saw her wagon burning, the fear he'd felt riding toward the smoke. He'd described pulling her up from the ground after the fire, thinking how beautiful she was even covered in soot and ash. He'd documented his growing feelings, his struggle to understand what she meant to him, his decision to risk his heart on love. "You kept all this?" she asked through tears. "Every moment with you has been worth remembering," Xavier said simply. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together on their porch, watching the stars and talking about their journey. Not just the physical journey from Independence to Oregon, but the emotional one from strangers to partners to spouses to parents. "If you could go back," Xavier asked, "to that day when your wagon burned, knowing everything that would happen after, would you change anything?" Victoria thought about it seriously. She thought about the fear and loss, the uncertainty and hardship. She thought about the struggles of building a life from nothing, the challenges of settling in a new place. She thought about the births that had nearly broken her, the winters that had tested them, the times when money was tight and the future uncertain. "I wouldn't change a single thing," she said finally, "because it all led here, to you, to our children, to this life. Even the painful parts were necessary." Even losing the wagon? Especially losing the wagon. Because if it hadn't burned, you might have just helped me fix the wheel and sent me on my way. We might never have really known each other. Xavier pulled her close. I like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be. Maybe. But I'm glad it happened the way it did. I'm glad you were the one who found me. They sat in companionable silence. These two people who'd found each other in the vast emptiness of the prairie and built something lasting. The night was cool, autumn creeping in again, marking another year's passage. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. Around them, the land they'd claimed and worked stretched out in the darkness. Lost wagon. Kept you. That's what matters, Xavier said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken a decade ago. You know what? Victoria replied, lacing her fingers through his. You were right. That is what matters. Then and now and always. The years rolled on, bringing change and growth and the inevitable sorrows that accompany a life well lived. Richard passed, leaving a hole in their lives that time slowly healed. Samuel apprenticed with his father, learning the horse trade. Margaret went to San Francisco to study medicine properly, the first in their family to receive formal education. Henry joined the new territorial police force, using his adventurous nature to keep the peace in the growing settlements. Victoria's hair began to gray, and Xavier's face gained character lines around his eyes and mouth. Their hands grew rougher with work, their bodies slower with age. But their love never wavered. If anything, it deepened with time, strengthened by shared experiences and mutual respect. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. There was music and dancing and food in abundance. Samuel gave a toast praising his parents for their example of what a marriage should be. Margaret read a poem she'd written about their love. Henry told stories, some true and some embellished, about growing up in the Cross household. As the celebration wound down and guests began departing, Xavier pulled Victoria onto the dance floor one more time. They swayed together to a fiddle's sweet melody, comfortable in each other's arms as only people who'd spent decades together could be. 20 years, Victoria marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Sometimes I still see that frightened woman by the burning wagon, and I can't believe she's the same person as the woman in my arms now. We've both changed. For the better, I think. Victoria looked around at the gathering. Their children laughing together, their grandchild, Samuel's infant daughter, sleeping in her mother's arms, their friends and neighbors celebrating with them. This was the life she'd built from ashes, literally. This community, this love, this legacy. I used to be so afraid, she admitted. After my parents died, after the wagon burned, I was terrified that I'd always be alone, that I'd never have a home again. And now I know that home isn't a place. It's not a wagon or a house or even a piece of land. Home is the people you love and who love you back. Home is what you build together. She looked up at him. You're my home, Xavier Cross. You always have been. Xavier's eyes shone with emotion. And you're mine, Victoria Cross. My home, my heart, my everything. They kissed there on the dance floor, surrounded by everyone they loved, and Victoria felt complete. The journey that had started with fire and loss had led to this. A life rich with love and meaning. A family that would extend beyond them into future generations. A legacy of courage and commitment. As the party finally ended and they prepared for bed, Victoria paused to look at herself in the mirror. She saw a woman marked by time and work, by births and losses, by laughter and tears. She saw strength in her face that hadn't been there 20 years ago, peace that she'd had to fight for. Xavier appeared behind her in the mirror, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. that I like who I've become, that I'm grateful for the journey that got me here, even the painful parts. She turned in his arms. That I'd do it all again if it meant ending up with you. Even the wagon burning? Even that. Because you were right, Xavier. Lost wagon, kept you, that's what matters. I lost everything that day, and gained everything that truly counts. They stood together in the quiet of their bedroom, holding each other close. Two people who'd found each other in the wilderness and built a love that would outlast them both. Outside, the Oregon night was peaceful, stars shining over the land they'd claimed and tamed and loved. Victoria thought about the young woman she'd been, setting out alone on the Oregon Trail with more courage than sense. She thought about the wagon catching fire, about thinking her life was over. She thought about a stranger riding hard toward her smoke, determination in every line of his body. Lost wagon, kept you, that's what matters. 6 words that had changed everything. 6 words that had proven true through 2 decades of marriage, through struggles and triumphs, through the daily work of building a life together. Victoria smiled against Xavier's shoulder, content in a way that younger version of herself could never have imagined. Yes, she'd lost the wagon, but she'd kept so much more. Love and family and purpose and home. And that, she thought as sleep pulled her under, Xavier's arms warm and strong around her. That was what had always mattered most. The story of Victoria and Xavier Cross became part of local legend, told and retold by their descendants. The tale of how they met, how a wagon fire brought them together, how they built a legacy from loss. Their children told their children, who told theirs, keeping alive the memory of courage and love, and the wisdom that what truly matters isn't what you own, but who you love. Years later, when Victoria and Xavier were both gone, their great-grandchildren would discover the journals and mementos Xavier had saved. They'd read about the journey west, about a burning wagon and a lonely woman and a drifter who learned to settle. They'd traced the history of their family back to that moment on the trail, understanding that everything they were had grown from that desperate day when everything fell apart and then, miraculously, came together again. Lost wagon, kept you, that's what matters. The phrase would be carved on the headstone Victoria and Xavier would eventually share. 6 words that summed up an entire life, an entire love. 6 words that captured the essence of what they'd learned and lived and left behind. Because in the end, that was the truth they'd discovered together. That people, connections, love, these were what endured. Everything else was just passing through, temporary as smoke on the wind. But love, real love built on respect and partnership and daily choice, that lasted. That became the foundation for families and futures and all the beautiful complexity of life. Victoria and Xavier's story was one of many that unfolded on the trails west during those years of expansion and hope. But it was theirs, unique and precious, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the transformative power of love found in unexpected places. And perhaps that's the real lesson their story offers. That sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in disaster. That loss can lead to finding. That the end of one journey can be the beginning of something better than you ever imagined. You just have to be brave enough to accept help when it comes, to open your heart when it's been broken, to believe in second chances and new beginnings. Victoria learned that. Xavier learned that. And together, they built a life that proved it true, day after day, year after year, until their story became legend and their love became legacy. Lost wagon, kept you, that's what matters. Now and always,